Hey, it's Jeannie, your SLP here again. This is the third and final installment of tips for parents for fluency. This particular document that I'm going to share right now is, where is it? Here it is. Okay, this particular document is written in Spanish. It's really to help parents who are raising bilingual children. And so it's written in Spanish so that a lot of my caseload parents can understand kind of where we're coming from when we're working with fluency with bilingual children. And again, fluency meaning stuttering or disfluencies occurring in their speech, but we would rather work towards fluent speech, right? So fluency. So one of the interesting things, I'm just going to scroll down a little bit because let me move my image there. Okay. So it's really interesting talking about bilingual kids. They are acquiring another language. Some kids are acquiring more than one other language. They're multilingual, which is amazing. But at the same time, sometimes can be a little overwhelming at the beginning, right? So research has shown that that there are some times where language can impact the fluency of their connected speech or their communication. Sometimes it's for a short period. Sometimes it's for a little bit longer, but think about it. When they're learning new words, they're trying to figure out, what vocabulary they're using, how it's different from their home language, or like in the case of me learning Spanish, when shoe is one syllable, but zapato is 3 syllables. It's a lot more complex and a lot more to say just to have that same message. So here it says bigger words as well can affect fluency as they're learning this new language. Also, as children age and they acquire more and more of the new language that they're taking on, the grammar gets more difficult. The amount of information they need to provide gets the requirement is much more of them. And it is difficult to kind of figure things out sometimes, especially when you have competing languages going on. But again, it should be pretty temporary. And, one of the cool things is that when I acquired Spanish later in life, I too went through this. I stutter all the time over things, and I actually still kind of do. You're going to see as I'm looking at this document in Spanish, but speaking in English, I'm going to stutter all over the place. So it's actually quite typical. So what is bilingualism? Well, we know that that's, acquiring another language on top of a language that they've already gotten, or in some cases they're being raised as a simultaneous bilingual where they're exposed to 2 or more languages at the same time and working through that. So there's different types of bilingualism. And how does bilingualism affect the fluency of speech? And it says, sometimes a child will mix vocabulary from one language to the other, which is called code switching, which is actually a normal phenomenon in children who are bilingual. It is okay for them to, in the same sentence even, put another word in. So if it's an all English sentence and then there's one word in Spanish, that's actually considered typical. It's here, it says it's normal, might be a temporary disfluency as they're still learning the other language. They may begin to have difficulty finding words or finding the correct word that they want to use in the language that they feel like their listening partner will understand. So that would be like, a student coming up to me and knowing, oh, I can speak to her in both languages. It's okay, it's fine. Versus if they went to another teacher who only spoke English and they had to be a little bit more cognizant of how they're communicating with that person so they can be understood. The child is presenting with difficulties in those grammatical areas where grammar is getting more and more intense, more complex. It could be that they're showing a little bit more difficulty there, as we had said before, as they're developing that grammar, and that grammar may be different from their first language, so it's kind of difficult. Incorporate the second or third language between the ages of 3 and 5 might cause a little bit of disfluency, but again, that depends on the child. Everyone is different, so don't read into that too much, but just know that there are some cases where bilingualism can impact the fluency of communication, but for a temporary bit. So recommendations and suggestions for parents, monitor the stutter, but also monitor where they're stuttering. Is it in both languages that they know, or if there's more than one language or more than 2 languages, is it in all of the languages? Is it in one more than another? What is it looking like? So just keep an eye out for that. Follow the recommendations of the Stuttering Foundation, which we've already reviewed in the 7 tips for parents and the 8 tips for teachers. If the stuttering persists for more than 6 months, then you certainly can go back to a speech pathologist and ask them to do continued testing, just to see if it's out of the range of what would be typical fluency. Try as an adult not to mix vocabulary in your speech. What we want to do for any bilingual child is provide them with rich language input in the language that we're most comfortable with. And so if I am using both English and Spanish with my child, I would use full, complete sentences in one language. I wouldn't say, yo voy a la store, right? I wouldn't mix English and Spanish. I would say, me voy a la tienda. I want to buy broccoli, right? So providing that input in full grammatically correct sentences in either language, that way there's a little less confusion, a little less opportunity to get a little riled up when they're trying to figure out the best way to communicate. But that being said, as adults have to think about that, please remember that if a child does it, or the child who's stuttering, we don't want to have any more language demands on them or say that they're not saying something correctly. They can mix words because that is typical. But think about how confusing it would be if we as adults mixed words and didn't provide that really rich model for them. So just so you know, we need to be more cognizant of that, but a child speaking in both languages in a sentence is okay. Scrolling on down. Okay. Just talks about a little bit more support for bilingualism, help the child with new words or difficult words to say. For example, you can help a child by, if they don't really know a word that they're stuck on a word or they can't figure it out, you can provide them with like the first sound of the word. Like if they were trying to say, and you knew something in the water and you knew it was an animal and you were like, ooh, pa, empiece con pa, pato, right? And that just gives them a little push in the right direction to get that word out without saying the word for them, without ruining their opportunity to try and communicate it themselves. When you speak to your child, try to avoid switching languages within a sentence. So don't mix words into a sentence in the same sentence, so that the child gets rich models in like pure English in one sentence or pure Spanish in another sentence, and it doesn't mix them up any further. Allow that child to use both languages when they're speaking. This is a review of what we had just said before. When you see that your child is having difficulties using vocabulary or forming grammatically correct sentences in conversation, it's important that you yourself, as a speech pathologist or as a teacher or as a parent, provide simpler language for them. Don't make it very difficult for them to try to keep up with your conversation. So for example, I know a lot of teachers sometimes were like, all right, put your cup in the trash, push in your chair, and then go sit on the carpet, right? Well, that's very complex. If we know a child is kind of having some difficulties, we might be like, okay, first we're going to throw our cup in the trash. Once they've done that, okay, now we're going to make sure we push in our chair, and then now we're going to sit at the carpet. So just breaking it down into smaller segments so that they have better understanding, and it kind of reduces that anxiety, simplifying things a little bit more for them as they're learning. Recommendations for speech language pathologists here. All right, carefully determine where the disfluency lies, where they're stuttering, and consider the development or language development in both of their languages, or if there's more, all of their languages. Consider what is normal, what is typical, what is not. And that's like a good place to start when you're trying to consider if something, or if their stuttering is relatively typical, age appropriate, or if it's something to really look into. And definitely want to see, is it just because they're learning another language at this point, or is this something that seems to be across the board, an issue across languages? Compare the type and frequency of disfluencies. So of course there's part word repetitions like pup, pup, puppy, or there's whole word repetitions, that, or there's prolongations where they might say the word and I saw her go, and so those are prolongations of sounds. So we want to see the type and how long they last, and really come up with a good calculation to see if it's within the typical range of fluency. Let me see, here we go with me reading in Spanish. Yeah, determine a child's preference or dominance for language. And so that's a speech pathologist. We would just try to determine, maybe they use English a lot more, see how they do with fluency in English, and just kind of just see where their strengths are and monitor any weaknesses there. When the child doesn't want to speak the second language, try to describe the reason why. Usually the child is really wants to be better at the second language than they are. So maybe they don't want to speak it, but just encourage the child to, persevere, continue on. Adding another language is something wonderful, and they can work through that. So then there's the 7 tips for communicating with your child. And we already reviewed those. Those are from the National Stuttering Foundation. And I hope that this helps you on your quest for working with your child in the home and having a better understanding of how we adults can assist our children, our students, with better fluency as they grow. So thank you so much. Please reach out if you have any questions at all. Thank you.